Welcome to CharityVillage Connects. I'm Mary Barrow. Nonprofits in Canada are notoriously slow when it comes to investing in new technology. Will they be left behind when it comes to the new AI tools that are poised to revolutionize our world? In this episode of CharityVillage Connects, we take a hard look at what AI has to offer nonprofit organizations, as well as its potential drawbacks. Is there a way to responsibly harness the power of AI for social good? To discuss these important issues, please welcome Beth Kanter. Beth is a well-established international nonprofit thought leader and author. Her books have examined and provided guidance for the nonprofit sector to explore a new way of thinking and operating in a connected world, a practical guide for using measurement and learning to achieve social impact, and how to build resilience in a nonprofit workplace. Her latest book, The Smart Nonprofit, examines the impact of artificial intelligence on nonprofits. Beth has been named one of the most influential women in technology by Fast Company and one of Business Week's Voices of Innovation for Social Media. Welcome to the podcast, Beth.
Mary, I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, we've been hearing a lot about AI and with all the news around ChatGPT this year. What should nonprofits know about this technology, especially if it's new to them? And what's important to know about the three categories of AI that you've identified?
Sure. So let's step back and just define it for a moment, because even though people know and hear and GPT chat, that's artificial intelligence, they may not understand like exactly how it works. So it's an advanced digital technology that it identifies patterns in data and actually makes decisions for us. And it uses something called algorithms, which are basically a set of rules or mathematical equations. And Alison Fine, my co-author of The Smart Nonprofit, she likes to use the word recipes. They're like recipes for baking a cake or baking some bread. And it takes a lot of practice to make them work well. And it also takes a huge amount of data. We'd like to say Library of Congress size amounts of data for training it to make decisions and do various automated tasks well. And the thing we have to remember is that it's doing tasks and making decisions that only people did in the past. And it's, deciding things like what movies we might want to watch on streaming platforms like Netflix, or what things we might buy on Amazon if we're purchasing items through Amazon. So in our book, we use the term smart technology, and it's kind of an umbrella term that encapsulates all different types of artificial intelligence, all its subsets, all its cousins, such as terms like you probably have heard: machine learning, natural language processing, large language models, computer vision, smart forms, chatbots, robots. All of those types of technologies are in this sort of AI bucket. Now, the new thing that's capturing all the attention has been called generative AI, and one of the tools is ChatGPT, and these are known as large language models, and they are driven by artificial intelligence, basically those algorithms, those recipes and data, and they allow you to have human-like conversations, and basically you ask it questions, and it can assist you with different tasks, like writing tasks, for example, composing email, writing an essay, even writing code, or those formulas for Excel tables. And the way it works is ChatGPT specifically, and others like it, it'll analyze data or text, in this case, text that's on the internet. Scary thought there. There are other types of tools, generative AI tools, that will work with images or even videos. And what it does is it looks for patterns, and then it takes that information and it generates new content based on those what it's analyzed in terms of patterns. And it's very persuasive, and it does it really fast. So I think that's really has captured our imagination around the potential for artificial intelligence, even though it's been around for many years.
So what are some of the opportunities that exist for nonprofit organizations who might be contemplating embracing AI?
Great question. There are many, many opportunities. And let's just take ChatGPT. I always like trip on that, but Chat GPT, for an example, since it's so much in the news lately, we've been hearing a lot from fundraisers who are using these tools to write thank you letter notes, to compose newsletter articles, press releases, even grant proposals. And one development officer I spoke to recently told me that she's using the tool and it's saving her many hours of time a week that she used to spend drafting materials. And it's particularly helpful if you have like blank screen syndrome or white page syndrome, where, it's really hard sometimes to get started. I don't know about you, Mary, but sometimes I had that problem too. It's always scary to start a first draft when you have nothing, right? And it can be really useful for that. And also it's really great at editing. It can edit for style and conciseness, and that saves a lot of time in the writing process. So that's one example. In the Smart Nonprofit, we talk a lot about the concept of co-botting, which is actually humans working side by side with the technology, but with the humans always in charge. And that allows the tech to do what it does best, analyze patterns of data and maybe write a draft of something very quickly, and let humans do what they do best, right? Which is relationships with people, creativity, creative thinking, problem formation. And so it's really best used as a tool that augments human work.
Hmm. So, in your work, you talk about using artificial intelligence to unlock generosity. Can you talk a bit more about this and why AI can be such an important tool when it comes to fundraising and working with donors?
Absolutely. So I just gave you an example of Chat GPT as part of the fundraisers toolbox. And we're going to see that more and more, especially as it becomes embedded in everyday tools that we're already using, like Microsoft and Google platforms, Microsoft Office and the Google Workspace. But a couple other ways that AI can be really helpful for fundraising. It can help customize donor communications at scale. And I'm not talking about the, insert Dear Beth. I'm really talking about the whole content of the email to really tailor it to what the donor's interests are and what they're excited about. And I'm not talking about big donors. I'm talking about like maybe those $100 donors, those thousands, hopefully, of donors that may receive an email communication for you. AI has the ability to really customize that at scale. I mean, that would be really take hours and hours and hours for a one person development office to do, right? To think about customizing 1,000 emails out to donors. But AI tools can do that. In fact, the Rainforest Action Network was able to use a tool like this that analyzed donor responses to different types of content and then generate new content that was of specific interest to the donor. And this helped increase their conversion rate by 600%. And that's not a typo. It's also being embedded in many CRMs, customer relationship databases or fundraising databases. AI is lying beneath those and doing a lot of different tasks. So, for example, pinpointing donors that are about to lapse and reminding officers, it's time to recontact this person. If you're managing a portfolio of 1,000 or even a couple hundred, that can be a time consuming task if you're doing it manually and you might miss a few, but AI really knows that data really well. Or else it can identify potential donors that you should cultivate because they are the most ripe to make a donation. I think it's really good at augmenting and automating desk work of major gift officers. I've been told by major gift officers that they spend a lot of time researching in their database and other sources to figure out what is this person interested in? What is their relationship with our organization? What is their wealth? What's the right ask? Some say even 20 hours a week of desk work, but AI can really do a lot of that very quickly and save them a lot of time to really focus on interacting with the donor, which humans do much better than these tools. Another use is, and I believe they're in Canada too, is the Children's Miracle Hospital. They have US and Canadian hospitals that are part of their network, and they do an online fundraiser with gaming. I don't know, maybe you already know about them, and they're quite successful at that. And they have used chatbots that are more sophisticated, that sort of act as information donation concierges on the website. And I love the example that when we interviewed them, that like, because they have both Canadian and American donors, someone may come to their site, maybe in the middle of the night, and want to make a donation. Maybe they're from Canada and they want to know how much, and the donation is in American dollars, and they want to know how much does that translate to? And the bot will answer that question and then maybe take them to a donation form that's in Canadian dollars. And what's cool about this is that automates a lot of work and it frees up staff time. Like, staff don't have to be at their desks 24/7 to answer those questions. They can focus on other tasks like relationship building. So these are just a few of the ways that it can be used in fundraising. I could go on and on because do a whole lot of research on that. So
Absolutely. So I think also it's important. I mean, you've mentioned about how it can reduce the hours that some people might spend by being a great tool to take off some of the sort of day-to-day kind of tasks that people might be struggling with, particularly now when there's such a workforce crisis, really, that we're facing now in the nonprofit sector, with an increased demand for services occurring at the time of burnout and labor shortages. Do you think AI is part of the solution?
Uh, yes, but maybe not directly. So, in our book, we talk a lot and we really believe strongly that AI can provide this gift to nonprofits, and we call it the dividend of time. Okay, the save time. And I think when it can solve a lot of, the problems around burnout and labor shortages, among other problems, maybe like donor retention rates, if we are able to repurpose that time. So for the example, in burnout, if we're able to use it to really improve the workplace experience, okay, so at a basic level, it can eliminate a lot of grunt work. I mean, a lot of us didn't get into the nonprofit sector to cut and paste data from one spreadsheet to another and to do this kind of grunt work, really, that is soul sucking and exhausting, right? So if we can remove a component of that with automating through the use of AI tools, that frees us up of some of that burnout, and it opens up some time that that we can think about well-being, we can think about creativity, we can think about planning and dreaming. But I want to caution nonprofits not to think about using that dividend of time to let's just do more of this work but faster. Really, we want to use it to reinvent the next chapter of organizational life. And that's not just a technology problem, it's a leadership problem and an organizational culture problem.
Yeah, that's a deep topic for sure, and AI can't solve all of those issues. That's absolutely true, but it's a very interesting sort of model that you're putting forward in terms of being part of the solution of some of the issues around HR matters and workplace struggles. You've also written recently about what you called the promise and the peril of using creator tools such as ChatGPT in nonprofits. And we've definitely talked about some of the opportunities that you really described very effectively. What are some of the perils that you see for nonprofits who may begin using AI in this way?
So I think if organizations are too eager to reap the benefits of this dividend of time, they may be tempted to use this incredibly powerful technology without enough consideration of the human or ethical ramifications. So, in the past, I also wrote a book about social media and worked in social media for decades. And it was always jump in, fail fast, experiment, and I think this technology is much different because of ethical considerations. And I'll give you an example. The National Eating Disorders Association, or NEDA, I think has become the poster child for potentially harmful use of generative AI. So they're the largest nonprofit dedicated to supporting individuals with eating disorders and their families. And they've run up this very successful hotline where they provide advice either through phone, texting, online. And what happened with the pandemic, there was a surge in demand like many other nonprofits have experienced this. I'm probably not pointing out anything new. Many of your listeners are probably experiencing this in hotline calls, because I guess if you have an eating disorder and you're isolated, it's the perfect storm for to have that come up again. So Nita has had a whole department that managed this, I think 4 staff people plus 200 volunteers, and they could barely keep up with this demand. And in response, Nita's leadership implemented something, a chatbot, AI-driven, more sophisticated model. Its name was Tessa, and promptly handed out pink slips to hotline staff. And worse still, the chatbot was not adequately supervised or trained in really controlled environments before it was put on the front line. And it was dispensing potentially harmful advice to people, so it had to be taken offline. So in this example, ChatGPT is a really powerful model, and it can go wrong really easily because it can provide false information. Researchers have called this hallucinations. And it responds with very persuasive text in this kind of conversational manner. And we kind of like maybe are apt to believe it, but it could be not accurate. It could be making stuff up. And I think with fundraising staff that are using these public free models, there's this risk of sharing private information, which is a concern. And there's increasing concerns and lawsuits about intellectual property. There's also reputational risks, especially if the text is not reviewed carefully by humans before publishing. And I can give you 2 examples. One is a nonprofit and one isn't. One comes from KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken in Germany. And they were using it to generate content for social media. And they sent out a, and let me explain what it does. It automated like social media content, like tweets or updates on LinkedIn. In this case, it was, I believe it was a tweet. And it was using a database of text that included promotional items like $5 off a cheesy chicken sandwich, and also a list of German holidays, which included or important dates in German history, which included Kristallnacht, which was the beginning of the Holocaust, right? So this tweet went out that said, get $5 off a cheesy, crispy chicken sandwich to celebrate Kristallnacht, because there was not adequate human oversight in the text. Another example of this was Vanderbilt University was using ChatGPT to write a heartfelt email about a mass shooting at Michigan State University, and there was a backlash because it disclosed that ChatGPT wrote the press release, right? So we have to, using AI ethically. Again, it's not a technical challenge. I think it's a leadership imperative, and it's important that we stay deeply human-centered and that we take this pledge of doing no harm, and we do that adequate testing, and we really push back and understand the data sets that these tools are using to generate content or make decisions, because that's where bias can creep in, and that's where potentially harmful harm can happen. So we can't do this unless we spend the time developing our ethical guidelines and providing training for staff.
Yeah, so it does resonate with me in terms of, and I've heard this from some of the other people I've been speaking to in this episode, about the whole dependence on the nature and the quality of the data being fed into the algorithms in order to be able to come up with the solution. I mean, it's still that old adage, garbage in, garbage out, right? Is that's sort of part of the problem. Not just the oversight of humans being critical, but the data could be problematic or inaccurate, correct?
Right, biased. It could be biased. The data set is not being inclusive, right? And we've seen, and we wrote about in our book, some examples where social service organizations were adopting these tools to do like risk assessments to determine who got services and who didn't. For example, in homeless people, transitional homeless services. And what happened when they automated this, they didn't understand some of the nuances of bias, and it started shutting out Black and brown people, and they had to stop using the system. So it's really important that we tread carefully because we could do harm. There's a term that was coined by one of the researchers, algorithmic discrimination, and we want to avoid that. And so we have to like understand. We don't need to know how to code necessarily, but we need to ask questions like what's the data set that this tool was trained on, and really understand, when there's a potential for bias to creep in, and be able to mitigate it.
Can you talk a little bit about the barriers that organizations in the nonprofit sector might face when attempting to implement AI technology? Is there anything that's specific to AI versus technology in general, which we know challenges a lot of nonprofits?
Well, in the past with tech, I've been in the nonprofit tech field for 30 years now, and it's always been resources. We don't have enough staff, we don't have the expertise, we don't have we don't have money, right? And in some ways, AI has many of the tools are free, or more and more they're going to be embedded in the tools that we're already using, like Google Workspace or Microsoft Office, or in internet search. So, and it doesn't require having a lot of expert level technical skills to use them, right? Because they become more democratized. So I think the big challenge that may be specific to AI is that nonprofits in the past have kind of taken this binary approach. Either they dismiss the technology, dismiss AI as cataclysmically dangerous, and I will not use it because the evil robots are behind it. Or else, like an example I gave before from Nita, they dive head first into it with the false notion that AI can solve all their problems, which are generally people problems. So I think neither one of these approaches is particularly helpful. We can't ignore AI. It's not a fad. It's not a hula hoop. It's here for good, and there's a lot of ways that diving into it without thinking through the ethics or safe use can go really wrong. So again, it becomes a leadership challenge, right? For us to be proactive about it, and to really think through, co-botting use cases, to really do the testing that we need to do to ensure that it's not going to create harm, and to get feedback from people as we're developing these and prototyping. Whether it's donors or staff, so that we're not doing these harm. And I think also, in addition, there's been a lot of hype that the robots are going to take all of our jobs. And the counter to that are two studies that come to mind that came out recently. One is from McKinsey and one is from the World Economic Forum, and that it will automate parts of jobs. It's not going to eliminate whole professions. And so what that means, and it's going to take time before that happens. So we really need to rethink through our workflows, and we also need to think about upskilling, right? And maybe retraining people to take on different parts of jobs. So those are some things that I think are specific to AI.
Well, we've actually had you've alluded to this in one of your responses related to the ethical issues that AI technology actually brings us and challenges us with. But can you talk a little bit, do a deeper dive about what your thoughts are on whether organizations need to consider ethical use charters, or even maybe the sector needs to have an ethical use charter for AI? But in any case, such as the one that maybe you're familiar with that the Furniture Bank developed for their use of AI. What are your thoughts around that?
Um, that's a really great question, Mary, because this is exactly what nonprofits need to do before they jump in, is to create an ethical charter. Now, we're starting to see some emerge from particular fields. I just saw one in the fundraising field that, lists different things like we've already talked about being human-centered, about avoiding bias, privacy concerns, being stewards of of the personal data that your organization is in charge of. It's also one thing that's more organizationally, I think, is also identifying technical partners or vendors that are aligned with your values, right? And also being able to ask them questions about, like, again, as we mentioned before, how you don't need to know code, but like what was the data set that was used, that this particular tool was trained on. And if they tell you it's a black box, it's proprietary, then move on to the next, next vendor, right? Again, we are in the social change business. We are a values-driven field, and we want to work with technical partners that are aligned with our values. It also takes finding the right use cases, and I sort of talked about this a little bit with co-botting, but in getting started, it's like AI isn't going to be used for everything. I've been hearing from people, I'm going to have it do this, this, and this. And said, no, think about like, what is the exquisite pain point that you need to solve in your organization, and begin with that, and there's lots of them, right? Are you answering the same question over and over? Are you cutting and pasting from one form to another? Is it taking you hours to draft a simple thank you letter, right? So start to look for those use cases that represent an exquisite pain point, and then take the time to like really walk through and think about like what the machine can do and what the humans could do. So that falls under this kind of ethical use policy. So there's around ethics, and it's about how you will go about developing and using this AI and adopting it in your organization. So yes, I haven't seen that particular guidelines from the organization you're referring to. I'm going to go look for it, but I think every organization needs to be thinking about that first before they put their hands on the tools.
Well, that's words of wise advice for sure. We talked about off the top the book that you co-authored called "The Smart Nonprofit: Staying Human-Centered in an Automated World," published in just 2022. As it relates to AI, what is one of the biggest takeaways from the book that you could share with our audience?
I think, again, this whole idea of staying human centered, right? Now, AI knows your data really well, but humans only know humans really well. And we really have to think about staying human centered at all costs, putting humans first, humans always being in charge of the technology, making sure that there's no harm done to the humans on the other end of the technology, whether that's your staff or whether that's donors or the people using your programs and services. The other thing that it's also really important to keep in mind when we're thinking about being human centered is, as more tasks become automated in the workplace, it's really important that we nurture and develop and support and provide training in emotional intelligence, right? Human-centered skills around empathy and caring for others and thoughtful communication and problem formation, right? The skill, as we adopt ChatGPT and we're able to generate text, it can't do problem formation. It can't frame things really well, and it can't figure out like what the problem is. And that's a human-based skill that we're, again, going to need to nurture. So that whole idea around human-centeredness is the big takeaway that we want people to take from the book, and then to use that to reinvent the next chapter of nonprofit life.
So you speak regularly about technology wellness for individual nonprofit professionals. And as we wrap up today, I'm wondering if you want to share a few tips or strategies that you'd like to leave with our audience.
Sure, Mary. So that comes from my book, The Happy, Healthy Nonprofit: Strategies for Impact Without Burnout, 7 or 8 years ago. And I think I was because I was an early adopter of technology, I started to feel the impact of technology on my brain and physically and on my mental health. And now, especially with social media, has really accelerated those impacts. And there's lots of data out there and research studies that kind of back that up. I think, technology can really take a toll on our health, our physical health, and it can do that in two ways. First, it can rob us of a good night's sleep. Sleep is really one of those things that's really essential to our health. And if we're doom scrolling and looking at our phones before bedtime and looking at the blue light that's coming from the screen, that's going to keep us from getting that deep restorative sleep. So we want to be able to really get some distance from our devices and not overdo it with screen time. So we're getting that sleep. It's also important to take breaks during the day. All right. Now we're in our computers, we're staring at the screen, we're sitting, and that's being sedentary, and that's really bad for our physical health, and it can lead to all kinds of bad health outcomes. So making sure that you're moving and taking regular breaks, even if you go to the gym, every morning, you still need to move throughout the day, and technology can actually help you with that with different devices like your Apple Watch or your Fitbit. Also, in the workplace, making sure that you schedule breaks between back-to-back meetings. Okay, there's some interesting research that came out of Microsoft just in the last year that physically shows the toll that it's taking on our bodies when we don't schedule that 5 minutes of rest time between meetings. It increases our stress levels, our cortisone levels, and of course that can also lead to bad health outcomes like cancer, heart attacks, and all those horrible things that we don't want to have, right? So scheduling those breaks between online, especially online meetings. And I think a new one, and I have to take a deep dive into this. I haven't seen much yet. I'm sure there's going to be more coming, but I think we can fall into the trap of always using the technology to let it do its thinking for us, especially when it can do those first drafts now. So your brain is like a muscle, and you have to like exercise it, or you can begin to harm things like your spatial skills or memory. There is a study that's showing that if you're using Google Maps to navigate all the time, that you should take a break from it now and then and just navigate the old-fashioned way, because it's using a different part of your brain. And I think it could be really easy to fall into letting generative AI just write everything for you, but then you're going to let that muscle in your brain kind of get out of shape, and that could potentially help be a danger to your brain health. I also want to say, I could talk a lot about this because I've written a whole book about it, that technology is not all bad. It's really how we use it. And so there's also lots and lots of really great apps that can help you with your technology wellness. And it's kind of a theme that we've talked about throughout this interview, that it's the technology in itself isn't bad. It's how we're going to use it and integrate it into our workplaces and into our lives. And we have to really think about the downside and mitigate the risks.
Well said. And, it's certainly been a fascinating conversation, Beth. I could talk to you for hours about this topic. And I'm sure that nonprofits across the country will enormously benefit from your insights into AI and technology generally, and your extraordinary expertise. Thanks for joining us on Charity Village Connects.
Thank you so much.